So yeah, this is Ideas with Beers. It's our weekly forum for anyone interested in active travel, whether you're a politician, campaigner, practitioner, journalist, politician, or just someone who's interested in the subject. We'd love to hear from you if you want to present an idea. We've got our email if you want to get in touch, which hopefully someone will put in the chat, and our website where Bob's slides are now uploaded every week before the session, so you can look at them before his update and check all the links out as he goes through them. So to stick to time, I'm going to ask Adam, if you're good to go, then I'll hand directly to you. And I don't know if you have any slides to share, which you should be able to do, but if not, then we can.
Sorry, I'm not good at slides.
No, that's fine. So over to you, Adam, and we're delighted to have you.
No, thank you very much for inviting me. And yes, I have been before, obviously as a campaigner, and know a lot of people on the call. So it'd be good. I'll explain what I'm up to, but also sort of how I got here and where I'd really like some ideas as well, which would be good because that's what you guys do. So yes, for those that don't know me, I'm Adam Tranter. I'm the West Midlands Cycling and Walking Commissioner, but I also, my background is in marketing and communications. I run a agency called Fusion Media. We're a marketing communications agency. We work with companies like Brompton and Specialized and Shimano and Co. And run the Bike is Best campaign, which you may have seen, the latest film go live yesterday, which is kind of an industry-funded campaign, a cycling industry-funded campaign designed to normalise cycling, help change the image of cycling, which we believe is critical to sort of changing the narrative, really. And my journey thus far is really, you know, I'm a lifelong cyclist. I was into racing. I thought that I could be a racing cyclist one day, but I kept finishing 37th and realised that I was never going to make an actual living from that. So I became very interested in the marketing side and journalism as well. And really, since I set up the company in 2008, we focused on it's always been about getting more people on bikes, but realistically, the kind of people that we were getting on bikes is really the stereotype of what a British cyclist is, you know, not for transport, not for utility, but for sport and recreation. So I took a lot of, you know, don't be wrong, like, I think that's really important work and I'm really proud of it. But probably about 4 or 5 years ago, we started working with brands like Brompton and others. And that really opened our eyes to what happens when you can get people cycling, doing normal things in normal clothes, and what it might look like if we transform our cities. That coincided with the time where I've got 2 twin boys, they're 8, and they said to me, this is quite similar to Chris Borman's story, so I'm not copying it, but it is relevant. They asked me if they could, you know, if they could cycle to school and into nursery at the point, and I sort of said no. But I then got myself a cargo bike, and I worked out how to cycle them to the nursery. And I got to the nursery and loads of parents came up to me and said, oh, I'd cycle, or I'd do this, but, and it was very clear that they all had very valid and genuine reasons for not necessarily doing so. And that was because it didn't feel safe for them. And then my kids got a bit older and could actually probably cycle to school. And I plotted a route to take them safely to school, and the school is about 1.2 miles away, and the route that I plotted to effectively stop them from getting killed was 4.2 miles, and I thought this is just nuts. And part of that route went through a park that has banned cycling since the early 20th century. So I just every time I looked at the system, it was well and truly broken. So we set up a school cycle bus, me and my wife, started to sort of hack the system, do it that way, do a little bit of, ride through the park and campaign for better stuff. And that led me on to seeing what I could do more broadly in Coventry, the city I'm from. And I became the bicycle mayor for Coventry for nearly 2 years. And I guess that was a very interesting learning experience for me, because I'd done the angry bit because I'd sort of, it was my kids and I was really frustrated. But then I sort of started to experiment with, I think, the levers for change and learning about how to make, how to make politicians interested and feel good about the work that they were doing, and not making it about cycling necessarily, but making it more about, having a just and equitable transport system, or having better streets, all the kind of things that we're fighting for. So the bicycle mayor stuff was kind of like an apprenticeship, because I'm a volunteer. I was separate to the council, but the council had an understanding that they would, engage closely with me, and I built a good relationship with the councillors and the officers. And through the work we did with David Cox, who's on the call, and also Sustrans, during the last mayoral elections, we looked at what needed to be done to really, help the West Midlands reach its potential. And there were lots of things included in the kind of asks, but one of them was to appoint a cycling and walking commissioner, and not aimlessly, because as I explained to people, having a cycling walking commissioner is not a silver bullet. If you're there just to, shake hands and open facilities for school cycling and things like all important stuff, that's not that helpful. So, I was very clean that they shouldn't appoint like a champion, but they should appoint someone genuinely that had, as Chris Boardman described it to me, and it was Andrew Gilligan who described it to him, you need to be speaking for the boss, and you need to have access to the cash. And that was kind of what we asked for. Said, you need to do this properly. And both the candidates, Liam Byrne and Andy Street, both the main candidates, I should say, the front runners, agreed to that. And Andy Street won the mayoral elections for the second term, and was good to his word, and made it one of the first things that he did. I went through a rigorous recruitment process, so I wasn't shooed in. It was an open and fair recruitment process. But really, obviously, it's what I believe, because, as part of being a campaigner, I suggested that it was the right thing to do. And I've been doing this for 5 months now, and it's quite something. It's the way I explain it is the hard things are easy and the easy things are hard. So that's really the summary I can give. I've obviously been learning on the job. I'm not a transport specialist and professional like many people are on this call, but I do understand the need for active travel. I do have enough that I can work my way around technically, but I think importantly, I understand the political side, and I understand the communication side of things that I think are really integral to getting success for active travel, and bringing the middle ground, because not everyone's going to agree, as we know, but the middle ground with us for this better future. So the hard things that are easy include securing funding from government. As we all know, the government has £2 billion for cycling and walking, but also we, as a mayoral combined authority, we bid for what's known as a City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, or CRSTS, or CRUSTS, as some people call it. And I hate the acronyms in transport, but we bid for government, and really, testament to, whatever your politics, testament to the central government's focus on both active travel and bus. Pretty much CRSTS is a active travel and bus fund in the main. So yes, there are bits for tram, there are bits for train, and whatnot, but the days of we'd like to build some more roads, please, are like long gone. And actually, some mayoral combined authorities tried that approach, and I'm told we're kind of laughed out of the room effectively. We are a tipping point thing now where I think there's a general acceptance that we can't do things the way we always did, and that the change is going to be have to be by definition different to how we've done stuff before to get different outcomes. So we have been awarded our CRSTS settlement, £1.02 billion over the next 5 years, similar to I think what Greater Manchester received, but the schemes, akin to how focused we've been on active travel and bus. When we've looked at the breakdown of the schemes, as I tweeted and I've said to people, £254 million of those schemes are schemes to enable active travel ultimately. So we've got now unprecedented funding along with ATF3, and which we had a really good a good response to from government and ATF4 going forward. So I thought the hard thing would be securing the money to go and do it. The other hard thing I thought would be doing is getting political will and consensus and persuading my boss that we needed to be bold on this stuff. And frankly, they're already there. They know why, but they just don't know how. And that's been the big learning for me is how to move into delivery mode, which I'll talk about in a second. I've never worked in the public sector before. I've owned my own business. If you want to hire someone, you hire someone. If you want to procure something, you ask them for an invoice and you pay it. And I'm obviously in a whole different world now. I think some of it's unnecessarily bureaucratic and holds us back hugely. And I'm seeking to, where possible, bring about efficiencies and different ways of thinking. Hence, I think one of the ideas part of this with Ideas with Beers is clever ways to get ahead and to streamline the process of transport delivery. And that's quite a niche topic, but it's really what, once you've sorted the political will and you've sorted the funding, it's all that's left really. So we need to get it right. And for my calculations, we spent about £40 million roughly, or maybe allocated £40 million over something like the last 4 years for active travel. And for my future calculations, in the West Midlands, we're going to likely have around £320 million over the next 5 years. So my point to the team is, what we've done so far is not going to be what we do in the future, because by definition, it needs to be drastically different to get different outcomes. Our local transport plan, which is just being finalised, states that we need to see at least a 700% increase in cycling as one headline stat, and that's over and above the previous, requirement to meet our mode share target by 2025, which is, I think, a 400% increase. So it's very clear that we need to get moving. So at the moment, I'm looking at delivery and looking at every aspect of that and how we most effectively do it. I don't have the answers, or the answers at least. But I think the first step is, defining that you have a potential issue. There's a transport skills shortage, there's a contractor shortage, there's all sorts of issues. The government have been criticised for not providing long-term funding settlements, which is sort of seen to be changing now. That will be really helpful for our planning. But I'm very keen that, I guess when I started this job, I thought that I might spend the first 5 months trying to win the argument, but ultimately we're on the right side here, I think, and that's not been required. So this is really about accelerating delivery, because we need to know that people aren't going to do it unless we provide them with the infrastructure to do it. And a lot of the focus in the organisation that I represent WMCA, Transport for West Midlands, have spent decades. So TFWM is quite a new organisation, but before that, Centro spent decades doing what I'd loosely describe as kind of behaviour change stuff. And you know, we're an organisation that deliver behaviour change, and that's like this word that, to be fair, the Department for Transport as well have been banding around, you know, for years about this is what it's all about. And I think we've got through now, but I've basically been relating it to, you know, being the mayor in Jaws and saying to people that, hey, come and swim in our waters, like it's great, like come and, you know, why aren't you swimming in our waters? And it's because it's petrifying. So, you know, our real focus is on you know, on mass delivery, and also developing relationships with Active Travel England. You know, I think as a campaigner, I was very excited about Active Travel England, and then I became frustrated about Active Travel England and the pace that it took to set up. I can now say, from having, you know, worked closely with Chris, the DFT, and obviously Brian as well, who we all know well, it's really promising actually, and they have a lot to do and a lot to work out and a lot of bureaucracy and perceived wisdom to kind of overcome. But really the power of sort of saying to people, you've got to follow the guidelines, you've got to comply with LTM 120, and if you don't, we're not going to give you any more money, and we might even take money away from you, has really, you know, for the first month or so before Active Travel England was launched in shadow form, maybe the first couple of months, I felt like I was the boy who kind of cried wolf. Like I kept saying, you know, Active Travel England are coming, you've got to get with the program, because we, you know, and not a lot changed or happened. And then as soon as the organisation, you know, sent its first email, basically people sat up and thought, yeah, okay, this is how it's going to be, and really understood. So that kind of soft power, even if it's just in funding, is really effective, and obviously it needs to be done fairly, and you know, it's a double-sided coin as a partnership to work with Active Travel England and local authorities, but largely I think we can achieve great things. And finally, just from my kind of little bit, and happy to answer the questions, but I guess finally just bring it into where we are right now. We have, I think we're in a really good position in terms of ambition, and as I say, it's got to follow up with delivery, but we have good stuff happening in my home city of Coventry. We've got, you know, some of you will have seen the cycle lanes being built there. We've got Binley Cycleway being built right now, which is probably 6 kilometres from the city centre to the local business park, and then up to the hospital for key workers. Really high quality stuff, you know, for the curb nerds amongst us, including myself. You know, we have the Dutch entrance curbs and continuous side roads. So some really nice stuff on those schemes, and that's what we're aiming for. And of course, I wasn't able to make the last session. I was ill, unfortunately, but you had my colleague Wasim Zafar on, who I work closely with, obviously setting out his vision for Birmingham. And I would just say that I know it's been mentioned a lot by folk that, you know, I know and we know on Twitter and other places, that really the local elections, again, regardless of your politics, objectively looking at the local elections, seems to you know, quite clearly infer in Birmingham, for example, where there are low traffic neighbourhoods, that candidates that stood almost solely on an opposition platform to those measures were not successful, and I see that as a real opportunity to get people excited and pumped about rapid delivery, because Birmingham is smart. They've got, you know, they've got a 4-year term now, the councillors, like continuously, it's all out elections. Some of the other, you know, we have to come up with a thirds part where you have three elections in 4 years for some of the other places, but we have a real opportunity to use those election results, again, regardless, it's not party political for me, but just it's a matter of fact that, you know, people thought that low traffic neighbourhoods and other things would be the key election issue, and actually, when, you know, polling was done in London, for example, it seemed to show that transport, even generally, was less than 12% of it. You know, less than 12% of people said it was a key issue, as an example. So I think people can see a better, you know, a better future. Sorry, I've got. Finally, someone just asked about the chat. I'll just get out of the way while we're talking about it. Is we have the West Midlands cycle hire as well, that's reached its first year anniversary. I kind of don't talk about the cycle hire loads. I like it a lot, and it's you know, it's a key thing that the mayor brought in. But I'm keen that it's not seen as, the risk with it is that it's seen as the cycling thing, like, hey, we did it, we've got a cycle hire scheme. And really, again, it comes back to the mayor and George stuff, is that people keep asking me, well, how do we make the cycle hire scheme grow? And I'm like, well, build better infrastructure and it will, you know, it will grow. And, you know, I think in Birmingham, e-scooters are particularly prevalent, even the private ones, but the higher ones as well. And, you know, I think we're looking at the modes, but for me, you know, my view on it at least is that e-scooters are very popular because you can at any moment become, wrongly, but any moment you can become a pedestrian. And again, it links into the fear factor. So, you know, in Birmingham we have lots of one-way streets that are no entry to anybody. You know, they're not contraflow cycling. We have lots of you know, areas that are very hazardous and feel very hostile to vulnerable road users. So looking at opening those up and solving those problems is the way to success. And that comes a little bit into the innovation side of things. I think we've managed to secure funding to look at contraflow cycling en masse, a la Belgium and Paris, which is really good. And looking at developing that and starting with Birmingham. So yeah, totally lots on. Really like the cycle hire stuff. It's a good advert for the region, but we are obviously, as we all know on this call, need to get building infrastructure.
Thank you so much, Adam. That's a really great whistle stop around what you've been doing. And actually, it's hard to believe it's only 5 months. If people could sort of put their hand up, get ready for questions, I'll just slip one into while people get warmed up. You talked about the things that were the hard things that were actually easy. Could you give an example of an easy thing that was actually hard?
Yeah, so I think the procurement side of things and what's called the single assurance framework, which we have to comply with. So basically, with devolution, the government's saying you have to you have to follow the Treasury's kind of green book principles and show that the money we're giving you, you're spending correctly. It's inherently the right thing to do. We should be, need to be demonstrating we're spending public money wisely. That's a given. But I happen to think that we probably spend too much time on stating the case for cycling, and walking, like nobody's ever heard it before. So, I kind of stated it to a colleague and said, look, I understand you need to do a business case. I totally get that. But does your business case need to start with, here is a bus? Sometimes buses have 2-deckers or single deckers, and you can fit more people on the double deck. You just take it for granted that, buses are buses. And I'm trying to kind of persuade, it doesn't fit in with the system, but I'm trying to persuade the powers that be that, that the active travel infrastructure is basic infrastructure. So, everything's based on the business case for, very specific criteria. Who's going to, rather than, we need this stuff because it's like a basic function of a transport system. So we, of course, need to prioritize, and we, of course, need to put it in the right places. So all the checks and balances are very important. I reckon we could lose about 30 to 40% of the bureaucracy. I don't quite know how yet, but I think that we, I think that we can. So that's one of the things. I think hiring people is tough. There is a shortage of people in transport. If you'd like a job, we're hiring now. I think that's also a challenge. And yeah, the procurement process, the forms after forms after forms. All this stuff is usual if you've worked in the public sector for a long time. But I haven't, and I've got all this cash ready to go, and we need to work out how to spend it quickly and do the right thing.
That sounds a good problem to have. Okay, let's get through the questions. So Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Adam, and thank you for putting a bit of curb nerd stuff in there right at the end. You knew your audience. I've got a question about increasingly in Greater Manchester, which is where I know well and was involved in the B network early days and all that sort of stuff. I am really conscious that we still haven't connected our science-based targets on net zero and transport adequately together. And a lot of our modal shift targets are actually fairly arbitrary when you look at them. And I'm just really conscious of, as Greater Manchester, we don't have an adequate decarbonisation pathway for transport. It's certainly not one that we can actually then shine a light on active travel and say, actually, this is where we need to get to. And it's just a big gap. And I know the West Midlands has got a similar ambitious net zero target. And I just wondered whether you've more successfully woven together sort of the radical decarbonisation we need to do in transport, because it's our second largest source of emissions, and actually the net zero targets that the West Midlands has got.
Yeah, so I think the local transport plan is, it's a really important statutory document, and it's one of the documents that Transport for West Midlands and the Combined Authority, who I work for, are responsible for. I just put a link in the chat, but read it, see what you think. But I think it makes the case very clear for not just the target of WM 2041, which we have, but actually that the status quo will not get us there, and it's a radical change and a radical shift. I think previous local transport plans, and the ones I've read, have said that too, and we've kind of just ignored it. But I think with the funding so closely tied to the stuff, to the decarbonisation agenda, we cannot afford to, and no one can ignore it anymore. And even if they could, one of the good things about having a commissioner is I make it very difficult to have a conversation that ignores active travel, and a lot of this stuff is not some very smart people working in the organisation, very good, well-meaning people, but just at the time they made their decisions, there wasn't someone in the room going, what about active travel? So I think we have the opportunity to tie it very closely, but the transport plan makes it very clear that not only do we need to have a rapid increase in cycling, but crucially, and we can argue over the figure another time, but I think I want to say it's like between a 17 and a 23%, I don't know that number, reduction in car mileage as well, vehicle mileage. So there is that acceptance there that even if our fleet becomes electric, that's not going to work, and congestion costs the economy a lot, which is obviously a key factor. So I think, yeah, to answer your question, I think we're doing okay at linking it together. The reality is making it clear that we can't make those future decisions in the same way we have in the past, basically.
I think Mark had a question that kind of related to this one, so I'm going to ask Mark to go next.
Thanks. Yeah, about 10 years ago, I did a study for Birmingham on cycle monitoring, which apparently led to having data on it led to the figures that they knew how many people were cycling, which led to the original Cycle Ambition City funding. So how, you talked about targets, Steve talked about targets, sorry, and linking to other things, but how are you going to know when you've got to success, and what are you doing on the rest of West Midlands to work out monitoring? Because this is really the Cinderella side of things, is knowing what's happening as opposed to targets and not knowing when you reach them.
Yeah, so I arrived at the Combined Authority, and my first job was to look at the Mayor's manifesto commitments, which I'm here to deliver, and also look at what we've stated that we're doing and where we are, because obviously we need to measure to know whether we're being successful. I can't find any way to gloss this up, but no one knew if we were hitting success or not, because they weren't measuring it in the right way. Like, there's no other way to say it. So I think we've relied on, and not helped by the fact that things like census data and things like that from which we based historic mode share targets off, are the latest census totally changes the question, so it's not comparable, as an example, and obviously a pandemic hasn't helped. So I've actually commissioned a kind of review into this right now, and we'll get I've already had the update, but we'll get the final methodology finalized in June, where basically we're using all the data sources we have, and then obviously the ones that are available, like the National Travel Survey, etc., to get to an overall baseline figure for journey stages, which is again slightly different to what we've measured before, and really the great prize that I'm going for is the, and things that I think links in politically as well, is the 50% of urban journeys cycled or walked by 2030. So I'm trying to build the baseline for that, and also where we need to go. The other thing is individual monitoring evaluation. So many, you'll know much better than me, Mark, because of your experience, but the transport perceived wisdom of monitoring seems to be sort of putting down those little rubber things down on the road and sort of saying how many cars went over. So what we are doing is we already have around 270 Vivacity AI cameras across the region, and we're building for the first time a very consistent program of, so whenever funding is awarded, the first thing we do, and this will be acutely important for things like low traffic neighborhoods, is we get the baseline data and we start monitoring straight away. And we also monitor what we value as well, because we've been monitoring traffic flow for ages, but no one's been monitoring pedestrian footfall, which we can now do through the AI cameras. So it's very important that we use the best data we have to do, and also know where we're going. So we're in the start of that process, but frankly we haven't had it to now, which is a shame.
Well, happy to help if you need help. And just one quick story is,
Sorry, Mark,
no, cut me
Mark,
off.
we're going to have to move on, because
fine,
Oliver's has got to leave at 6. So sorry if you're going to have to pick it up with Adam offline, because Roxanne and Dave, could you just ask your questions one after the other, and Adam, if you can answer them, and then we're going to have to go to Oliver.
Thanks, Claire. And if there's no time, that's fine as well. Hi, Adam. Nice to see you again. Quickly, Cambridge still seems to be struggling to recruit our walking and cycling commissioner. Perhaps it's a politically risky position. Any tips on how we might get this person in place? And my other question was, we have so many layers of governance and transport planning. Is the local transport plan the best opportunity, or are there other transport plans that we maybe need to be focusing on? We have several at several levels of government.
Okay, and before you take that one, Adam, Dave, can you just keep your question really tight, and then we'll go back to Adam.
Yeah, Adam, I'm quite keen to find out about the breakdown of trips that are made. Inverness has got 40% of just 30 bikes going to the hospital, 3.5 kilometres on an e-bike, which is sort of quite a big uptake. That's from a standing start 3 months ago. And I know in Glasgow it's about 40%. What sort of figures are you finding? And if Tim's still around, I know he's not, what sort of figures are we finding for other schemes? How are the bikes being used? Are they making those convenient journeys? And are they making a big impact on things like station to hospital when reducing the demand for car parking?
Thanks, Dave. Over to you, Adam, if you take those two.
Yeah, sure. So I think the commissioner role, as I started out by saying, just having one is not sort of enough. And I don't know enough about Cambridgeshire, but my gut is that they think that having a commissioner will solve the problem. And actually, if there was real political will there, and it would be very easy to attract somebody motivated by that. The assessment I had to make when I took the job, and it was the same assessment that other commissioners have had to take, is this organisation really serious about this? You have to answer that question first, and I think you could get an ambassador quite easily, but actually having somebody who's willing to sort of stake their reputation on it, etc., is going to be tough. So I would encourage, when lobbying, I would be encouraging, for the combined authority to really be making it clear what, why they want one and what their kind of commitment is for that as well, and not just a knee-jerk reaction to, I think they got a telling off by government, didn't they, on the last thing. So just making sure that that's not the case. Local transport plans are good. You have to infiltrate the county council, city council's plans as well, though, by developing a really strong working relationship, because those plans are obviously very important as well. Cycle hire, facts off the top of my head, but we've done around 250,000 rides so far. In Coventry, for example, 95% of the journeys made are A to B journeys, so they're not people riding around parks for fun, albeit that's quite popular as well. So we are really seeing genuine use. I think the average trip length is something like 18 to 20 minutes. Very happy to sort of follow on that stuff. In fact, easier than that, the guy who, I can't remember his name, but he writes for Mind the Zag. He's been using Serco data for the West Midlands to do a big analysis of the West Midlands scheme. So it's all there for available to be analysed.
Absolutely fascinating. Thanks, Adam. And I'd love to have you back on maybe in another 5 months or before, so that we can kind of compare how things are going. And I know you've got to go because you've got a meeting with some of the senior team. So thanks for joining. And it's kind of one in and one out. So we will say goodbye to you in a moment, and over to Oliver, who is with us, I believe. I have been messaging him.
Hello.
Hi, Oliver. So thank you for joining us. And I know you're on a bit of a tight timescale as well. So Oliver is the head of UK campaigns for the Clean Cities campaign, and I'm sure he'll give us a little snapshot of what that's all about. Over to you, Oliver.
Thanks, Claire, and nice to see you. Actually, we've been emailing and tweeting, and nice to see a lot of other faces. I see some familiar faces, but also I feel like you look behind the curtain, the wizard behind the curtain. I can see lots of people I probably engage with on social media. So I'll quickly throw you a slide deck, but I'll do my best not to destroy you by PowerPoint. But there's some engaging images on there that I thought might help bring our campaign to life. Bear with me a second. I also want to share my sound with you as well. Here we go.
That's great.
Great. Sorry, I'm just on a different computer. I got robbed at the weekend, but that's a different story. Okay, so I'll introduce me first. Yeah, I used to work at City Hall in London for the Greater London Authority. For a few years, I was leading on transport emissions policy and developing the scheme, the ultra low emission zone, and did a lot of work on electric cars. But before that, I was actually a transport planner at Transport for London. So I can definitely get into the dirt around curbs and desire lines and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully that reassures you. I've got knowledge across the spectrum, but I jumped into the campaigning side of stuff a couple of years ago. And actually I saw Adam recently at an event, and I kind of picked up that catchphrase of you govern in prose, but you can campaign in poetry. And we were just talking about how different it is on either side of the fence. I'll introduce the campaign to you that I now work for, and then there's just a few nuggets that I hope you'll take home with you, which is around a big European report we did, some stuff on cycle parking we're campaigning on, and school streets. So the Clean Cities campaign is actually, we're a coalition of more than 60 organizations across Europe. So I head up the campaign in the UK. And we're encouraging, we're kind of directing our energy at city leaders. So it was great to see Adam on the call, who's obviously part of the West Midlands leadership team. And we want to see these cities transition to zero emission mobility by 2030. So we're talking about reallocating space for walking and cycling, but we are also talking about more electric vehicles, but crucially shared electric vehicles, and not one-for-one and private car ownership. And we're hosted by a charity that's based in Brussels called Transport and Environment. They've been going for about 30 years. They've done some great work recently. They've definitely done loads of analysis around the Dieselgate scandal when all that came out. And they also did a campaign recently called The True Cost of Uber, which I found really fascinating. So the strands of work that we look at in the campaign, it's around vision setting, right? We're trying to have that, build that atmosphere of like, we can do this. Shifting the narrative, so actually exposing some of the negative impacts of things like diesel cars, especially something I'm focused on in London. Building movements, so that's kind of all our coalition building, and leveraging those political moments, because they're really crucial for engaging citizens, but also like changing policy, and that's something I've been doing recently. So the first thing I mentioned was our city ranking report, which you can look up at your leisure. This is something we launched in the spring. It looks at 36 different European cities. And in the UK, we looked at Birmingham, Greater Manchester, most of London, and Edinburgh. And we were ranking them all according to how well we think they're doing according to our vision of zero emission mobility. So it includes how much space is there for cycling, for walking, how accessible is the climate-friendly public transport, such as the bus network. So an example here, we actually did scorecards for each of the cities. And one of the big stories that came out of this report in the spring was around, you probably would expect this, but London, Manchester, and Birmingham were the 3 most expensive cities in the whole of Europe for public transport. And that kind of came out at the same time the rail fare increases, and need we get into this whole debate about why the Chancellor has decreased fuel duty at the same time. So I do want to talk about bikes, and especially where we keep them, because that's been something I've been campaigning on recently. So I've got a picture here of a couple of solutions that are going out on the street. But the reason I want to talk about this is because right now our campaign thinks this is actually really awkward. So we launched a mini campaign called This is Awkward, to show where people are forced to keep their bikes due to a lack of secure cycle storage. And this was specifically aimed in London for the local elections, because every council in London was up for election just last week. And we also looked into the data that the councils had on who's waiting. We found more than 60,000 Londoners were actually still waiting for a space. And when we started to engage with people, some of them have been waiting for years. So we jumped on social media and started to ask everyone to send us their pics of where they actually keep their bikes. And we ended up getting lots of people telling us it's flaming awkward. And we then decided, well, we've got all these pictures, let's start actually making some noises and put them up in a big billboard so actually people can start to see. So here they are. We kind of put them around parts of the city, and we kind of use that crowdsource element of the campaign with all the pictures to get them up in lights. And we certainly grabbed a lot of attention, and that's where I was really lucky to start engaging with Claire and a lot of other people likely on this call that I just don't know behind the Twitter handles. But it certainly struck up a real conversation in London, but also in other cities as well. And the politicians started to respond as well. We really saw secure cycle hangers coming up in the agenda in manifestos in the local elections, which, I don't know if we ended up making secure cycle parking sexy, but who knows, but people were talking about it anyway. And we coupled this with some research with an organization called Fair City, who I think are fab. They're quite small. They're a community interest company who do research into a lot of issues related to inequity in the city. So we felt like there was definitely a real unfairness with the lack of cycle parking in the city, that more than 60,000 people waiting, but also the costs of the cycle parking. And I'm really hoping this will work. I'm shared my sound. It's just a couple of minutes of a video to bring this to life.
My name is Suzanne and I live in Islington in St. Peter's Ward.
My name's Evelyn Woolacott and I live in Southwark.
My name's Kerry and I live in Southwark, and Borough in Southwark.
I store it outside my house, attached to a railing with 3 expensive locks, and hope for the best.
Currently I store my bike in the cycle hanger. Previously, before then, it would be in the flat, but due to kind of storage issues, that wasn't really ideal. So the hanger is perfect for the bike.
Yes, I do. I think because now so many more people are cycling and have bikes, that there is, definitely a need for more secure cycle storage.
It's a massive issue. So many people have taken up cycling, especially with COVID, myself included, and most people don't have the space in their property to hold a bike.
No, it's not fair if you pay more for a cycle space, because you can put 7 bikes at the same place where that 1 car needs. So what's fair on that? So parking space, as we all know, is highly subsidized, just nobody ever talks about that.
I don't think it's fair. I think cycling should be at a reduced cost, because not only does it benefit the environment, it's good for our health.
Well, the council needs to just act faster, have a person who is dedicated to this task, and buy more cycle hangers.
I think it's a mixture of people, mainly the local authority, the council. However, with third parties that could come in and help, like the cycle hanger, they work in partnership with the local authority to kind of address the issues in the local area where the spaces could be identified, and then kind of come together and put cycle hangers in those spaces, which kind of benefits everybody in the local area.
Great, so hopefully that brought it to life for you a little bit, and perhaps as other city people in different cities around the UK that are starting to think, let's bring this campaign to our city, and I'm starting to wonder where to take it next. But we also found, you could hear referred to in that video about the cost of the cycle parking in the spaces in these hangars, and we put out research that when we looked at the figures, like if you've got a family of like 4 bikes, it's going to cost you a damn sight more than actually just buying a car and then parking it outside your house. And you can see here, even the average cost of a cycle hanger space is more than a small petrol car, and especially more than an electric car. So we feel like there are a lot of councils declaring climate emergencies, but not quite getting the balance right in this. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was around our campaign on school streets. Actually, just on Friday, we launched a European-wide campaign called Streets for Kids. And that's been popping up with more than 300 events, I think, across Europe in different cities. So my equivalent in Belgium, in Spain, in Italy. I've been hard at work helping work with grassroots campaigners to put on some events or activities or even protests outside schools, to be asking for more school streets. I don't think you probably need me to explain to you what a school street is, but it's certainly a great opportunity to close the road outside the school during pick-up and drop-off time to make it safer and healthier for kids going to school. And what we've been doing recently is some engaging activity on the streets to engage all the newly elected councillors that have now appeared in London. And this is a very, very quick video just to give you a flavour of what happens. Don't need to see that again. So we started off in London with some parents actually from the Hackney New Primary School, and they actually did some speed monitoring, which we thought was a great activity, and the kids got involved, got fake, hair dryers out, and actually the police were issuing warnings to a lot of drivers that were breaching the 20-mile-an-hour zone outside the school. And then we also issued some YouGov polling, which actually started to build a consensus for school streets, and we found that the majority of parents actually think the best way to spend time with their kids, would you believe it or not, is actually by walking or cycling them to school, which I think is really helpful to support the rollout of school streets. Alongside, actually, what do they find the most stressful thing in their day? Okay, getting the kids to bed, their homework, but actually the school run is really high up there, far greater than meeting your manager at work, which I know is sometimes terrifying. So we launched the school jam on Friday, which is a pop-up cafe that we're touring around a few parts of London, outside schools that have the school street. And the idea of this is that we are engaging the parents and the school and the local politicians to actually say, isn't it wonderful we have this school street, how we can use the space differently. Kids can engage with their parents before they go to school. And obviously it was littered with fantastic puns from our agency Glimpse. Less traffic, more jam being the big ask and message of the day. And I've just come back from one of those this morning in Wandsworth, and I think I saw Susie on the call, so I'm really grateful to the local living streets groups that have been helping us out with this. So I'll leave you there with a snapshot of some of the sort of messages we were actually getting kids to write down. Why do we love our school street? Because when I come out of school, I feel safer. I mean, who could argue with that? So the material that we're getting from this activity, we're really hoping will enable us to engage more with all the councillors and get some firm commitments on this, because we were actually working alongside one of our key partners, Mums for Lungs, who have been asking for a school street outside every school in London by 2025. And I think my final slide was to give you some contact details. If you found that interesting and you'd like to know more about Clean Cities campaign, you can find me on Twitter, or you can give me a traditional email. That's the end of my slides, and you can see my face again now properly.
Thank you, Oliver, and lots of love in the chat for the This Is Awkward campaign. That, as you say, that's how we connected, and I thought it certainly made a splash. And while people are warming up for questions, I just thought I'd ask, have you noticed anything changing as a result of that campaign? Have you, obviously you mentioned the elections, but have you noticed it kind of landing anywhere? Have there been any changes as a result?
I think it's a little bit too early to kind of see change on the ground because of the election. It was only on Friday, but I mean, from the campaign, like, I was amazed at the reception it got, and it really set fire. Like, I was on lots of regional radio, on the TV. It's been on there a couple of times, and we've been approached by lots of people. So, like I said, it's kind of like created that conversation. I really want to capitalize on that and make it bigger and stronger. And what's changed really, I think, I mentioned the manifesto commitments, right? I don't think many of these parties would have been putting cycle hangers kind of like almost front and center on some of their transport or sustainable travel sort of commitments if it wasn't for the campaign. So I think that's really good. I'm going to tally up like how many hangers we got committed so I can feed back to everyone who engaged in the campaign. But certainly I'm going to be keeping a beady eye now on all those commitments that come through. And I'm not going to let the Mayor of London get off the hook either, because he actually did a major commitment in his manifesto when he was elected. So he said he'd deliver about 5,000 of them, which is actually about 5 a day in a 3-year term. So I'll be hot on his heels as well. So maybe I can report back on if the campaign's been successful in about 6 months' time, if we've seen more cycle hangers going in. But I do think my local council have been trolling me, because I see cycle hangers like on the street every time I walk down now. It's probably just as a result of this campaign. All I can think about is cycle hangers.
Yeah, Ruth, it would be good if you asked that question, and then Dave, I'll ask you to come in. If you could keep your question short and sweet, that would be great.
Hi, Oliver. Great presentation. Thank you very much. Do you know anything about planning? Because people who are asking to put sheds in their front gardens or drives, and they're not allowed to, but you can put a 4x4 there without any having to make planning applications. And Kew Gardens, for example, where they want to put more bike parking, are told they can't because cars move and bikes are stationary. Once the bike hangers are there all the time, whereas a car will go. So I don't know if you've come across that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, yeah, this is an example of how the campaign ballooned a little bit, because I got contacted by a NHS worker who lives in Camden, and they bought a family cargo bike. In fact, they were friends with a cyclist that died in London last summer, and they felt like they needed to make a difference. They joined the London cycling campaign, and they bought a family cargo bike. And now, actually, I think it was, in fact, John might be on the call from Camden Cyclists. They put this big box and on their parking space in front of their home to store this family cargo bike, and now the council are asking them to remove it because of its size. And when I went to visit them, I went down this cul-de-sac and I just saw car after car right outside the house, and then you just get to their house. It's a big bloody box, but to be honest, it's not a car, right? And it's kind of the same size as a car. Regarding what you said, Ruth, like, it's basically comes down to planning that this box is a permanent structure, and the car is treated as a temporary structure. In fact, the council told them if you put some wheels on that box, then they might think differently about it, which is just completely absurd. But it is ultimately down to planning guidelines of different councils and how they interpret those guidelines. Then at the end of the day, the politicians are in charge, and they are ultimately in charge of the guidelines as well. So they got onto BBC London with that issue, and I know there's been a similar case in Birmingham. I think it's something we could keep looking into, and I've been liaising with one of the national papers who are doing some research into this. I saw something similar in the Times from Dublin as well recently as well.
Thank you. Dave, could you go next and keep it brief if you can, please?
Hang on, that's it. Yeah, I'll just sort of pick up on that car one. I've got a campaign on our back lanes, and in each lane there are at least 3 or 4 sawn cars. Some of them have been sawn for 3 or 4 years. So all you have to do is get a VW Combi, open the back door and put it statutory off-road notice, because it's on your own land. So that solves that problem. Put it on bricks. But Trevor Parsons and I did a project in Hackney in 2003, and it's called Home Bike Park, and we found very many ways to store bikes in buildings. One option is to buy the knockdown flat pack steel tool stores that you can get for equipment, and normally planning, as long as it's not more than 1.5 meters high and it's not more than a certain area, it can be put up. Mm-hmm. That's what I find that there's a big issue with, and we've been doing this for the past 20 years. You know, getting parking up. It's the thing I identified in 1997, that you're not going to ride bikes unless you've got residential parking that's convenient. And one of the
Thanks, Dave. We better keep it moving.
Okay, just one thing, Claire, and that is, for a car parking space, you're probably paying £1,500 a year for a space that's valued at about £30,000 if you wanted to buy a car parking space. The capital cost.
Dave, can you put some of this in the chat, mate? Because we'll keep moving. So, Mark Strong, it would be great if you would come in now with your point.
Thanks. I just wanted to let others do. There was talk about all this planning and so on, and Roxy was talking about it earlier. My friend Steve Roos, who's a planning officer in Brighton, who was a planning officer of the council, is now independent, was very delighted to represent 2 local residents on appeals and defeat his previous employer. And basically, the inspector walked up and down the street, said there are lots of bike sheds in this, lots of garden sheds in this street, all of which break planning rules. You've served no enforcement notices on any of those. Your policy supports bikes. How on earth, why are you singling out the bike shed only for enforcement? And gave the appeal in favour of the resident and gave costs against the council on 2 occasions. And now the council doesn't bother because it knows that any time there's an appeal, it'll lose. They're relying on bullying. Essentially, that's what they rely on. They'll send you a letter saying, take it down. And people say, oh, the council's told me to take it down. I take it down. It needs somebody to basically front up a test case to take it to appeal, and that will incur costs. And once they lose, they'll stop doing it. So, Roxy, if you're prepared to be that person, or somebody else is prepared to do it, the problem is every council is independent. Every council planning department is independent. So just because you say, oh, no, Brighton doesn't bother anymore, won't wash in Haringey or Cambridge or Manchester or anywhere else. So
Yeah,
doing it as a national issue is much better.
I think, yeah, I mean, this couple, if I'm honest, they're quite upset, but they're ready to go and either work alongside the council, or they're ready to hire like a freelancer who will help them go through the planning.
My friend Steve Reeves will.
Oh, great. Well, if you can email me.
He's already done 2, as I said, so he can just say, I've got the track record of doing it.
Yeah, great.
He's specifically a transport development control consultant.
Oh, perfect.
And he's now gamekeeper turned poacher. He's happy to get one over on councils.
Right, this sounds like another success story for Ideas with Beers. So I'll help link you two up offline if you're not already. But I also like the idea of a legal challenge by CamCycle. I was just going to ask a really basic question to finish us up on this topic. But if anyone has got any other questions, we have got another couple of minutes of Oliver. My question was, like in Manchester, we have no cycles, there's no safe cycle storage, there's not a single hangar, not one. How do you start this? So do you have to persuade your council to create a funding pot? How does any council get started with cycle hangars? Because we've got big fat zero in Manchester. Anyone come in? If Oliver, you don't know, if anyone else on the call does, but I'll start with you, Oliver.
Yeah, I expect I think if Simon Monk's on the call, he might have some experience of how it started in London, but I expect it kind of comes from a pot from the central's either transport authority or the government kind of saying, you know, you can bid into this as a council, and then that gives them the opportunity to soak up all the costs and actually trial it out. But it ultimately depends on willingness from the council, I guess, and then also demand from residents. So if no one's actually asking for it, they won't treat it as a priority either, which I think is like how this campaign has worked a little bit, because we can show all the pictures coming in, we can show the waiting list data they have, but I don't know if that is, in Manchester, the councils are actually keeping any waiting lists, or people just don't even feel like they can ask the council for it because they don't actually think it's an option. And maybe there's an element of actually explain to people these options exist. And it goes back to that issue of like, look what London has, why can't we have London transport style system in Manchester as well? And coming from Manchester, I'm looking forward to taking the campaign to Manchester as well. So I'd love to be in touch more, Claire.
Oh, that sounds promising. Thank you. And Roxanne says that they've hopefully got a council looking at this in Cambridge. So hearing from them would be great, because it's definitely got a lot of interest. Okay, any final points or questions for Oliver, or shall we allow him to leave 4 minutes before he said he really had to go? And then we'll hand over to Bob for a little news update before we finish off with Ruth.
I will say maybe one final thing as well is on the school street stuff and the streets for kids. This was like a real sort of like kickoff for that, but we want to do something bigger and bolder in the autumn. And we've just recently had a conversation with Kid Equal Maths, and we've kind of teamed up with them on this kind of week of action, because I know they're doing a lot of stuff this weekend. There's one in Reading and London, but in the autumn, we want to do a big bang where we're actually doing everything on the same day. So if people are interested in that, do keep in touch, and we'd love to see things spread across the UK, because I've only just primarily been focused on London recently, but I know the UK is bigger than London because I'm not from London originally, don't worry.
Okay, well, I think we're good to leave it there. And if there's anything in the chat you can pick up before you go, Oliver, otherwise, thank you. And if Bob, you're with us, I will hand over to you for our later than normal news update. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And Oliver, if you could put your Twitter handle, there've been different ones going on in the chat. And I just wanted to say that your example of a bike being inside where you live is very good, but you are not allowed to have a cerise blue handlebar tape with a pink frame. It's a rule. And without rules, society will fall to pieces.
I best get on my bike there, don't I? That's what I'm about to do.
Yeah.
No, we're an inclusive bunch. All handlebar tapes are allowed.
No, I don't know. Okay, so, right, I assume you can see that. News update 10th of May. Right, so don't forget, send me info to chairrdrf@aol.com. I did actually put up a lot of stuff about Oliver's campaign previous week, so we've been spreading the word. That's again, same one from Kiev, because I just like the look of that guy on the bike there, and that guy on the bike using his bike as a mobility aid to get through devastation. And here's something new this week. There's some people using bikes to get essentials to vulnerable elderly people. And if you go to that Twitter handle, or sorry, Facebook, you can see a short video of it. Also, you know, I'm just breaking the rule about how we only do stuff within the UK because it's about Ukraine, that's important. And old Mobike share bikes are being transported to Kharkiv to be used by local volunteers, which is good, although a lot of people have had bad experiences with Mobike bikes. So, you know, maybe they're not the best kind of bikes to be being used in Ukraine. But anyway, do take a look at that. And there's your sticker, which you can download there. Okay, yes, Adam mentioned the Bike is Best video. You can see it on Twitter there. And what wasn't mentioned is that in that video, we have our very own Ruth, who is there in the video cycling along, and that looks very good. Also, Active Travel England will be at the Cycle City Active City Landau conference to discuss designs and propose schemes with delegates. So do pop along to, I mean, I'm sure you see the adverts for the Landau conferences. There's Lovable Streets as well. I think Active Travel England might be that one as well. So do go to Landau conferences and you can see what's coming up. Also, don't forget, starting next week is the Andy Cox Challenge. Andy's been on Ideas with Beers before, and he's doing this as a fundraiser for Road Peace like he did last year, but he also does specific themed days. So for example, for those of you in London, next Wednesday, he'll be meeting up with Jeremy Vine, who you know, and he's starting there. Cycle Fit Holborn, finishing in Regent's Park, and the theme is road crime reporting. And of course, as you know, Cycling Mikey, who's also been on Ideas with Beers, hangs out in Regent's Park. So he'll be pushing the road crime reporting issue on that day, Wednesday next week, and he'll be doing different themes on each of day of the week. So go to that link, please, and you may be able to join in, cycle alongside him, run alongside him, walk alongside him, whatever. And there'll be lots of people discuss general issues about road danger. Okay, here's something from Clean Cities. Parents find school run 3 times more stressful than work meetings. And this was you know, Oliver's already mentioned that, but do go to his website. This is specifically the campaign about the school run, and it was a YouGov poll saying which one, if any of the following, would be the best way to spend quality time with your kids. And so, you know, you got 50% walking or cycling to school, and driving goes down there, public transport way at the bottom, and don't know is also doing quite well. But that's quite a good thing for walking or cycling to school with your kids. Oh yeah, the local elections, right? Okay, so here's something that's important about how in Enfield, the Labour Party didn't actually make much of a fuss about the LTN, the main LTN that had been put in, and also a Guardian summary about how well the Labour Party did generally. Now, the general feeling has been that the antis did very badly, but there were a few exceptions, like in the area next to the LTN in Enfield. Also, while they didn't do as well as you might have thought in Dulwich in Southwark, I think they did not too badly, and also in one of the seats in Oxford. Whereas the pro-LTN people did well, both the incumbents and also the Greens have done well in various places. Simon said something about this in the chat. There's also an article in The Big Issue, which is quite an interesting summary. I would say generally, I mean, this is my view, I'd like to hear what other people think, is, as we said in the last couple of weeks with the Centre for London study, and Adam mentioned this in his talk today, we have a position where it wasn't such a big issue one way or the other. So the sort of big backlash against LTNs doesn't seem to have happened, given those few exceptions. But having said that, I hear just a few personal thoughts. Labour, Greenwich did as well as the indifferent ones. Don't forget, the main issues weren't transport, and there was a very strong anti-Tory thrust because of Johnson and other issues. So we don't know what exactly was happening in terms of how people felt about LTNs. Also, we have to remember that there was a low turnout. If there's a big turnout in a general election or the next council elections, it could be different. As I said, voting was mainly not about LTNs. And the current the current councillors who've come in may not be anti-LTN, but they're not necessarily pro. And you have to remember, when you look at tweets from people like John Burke, the councillor in Hackney, who put in a lot, been an enormous amount of hostility to councillors who had a big profile in supporting LTNs, a lot of harassment and other things. And we don't know if the people who've come in will have the bottle to stand up for LTNs and cycle lanes and school streets, etc. That's what I just said. They may not be prepared for the opposition. Don't forget, outside London in particular, there are not that many LTNs and cycle lanes in place. We're going to have to fight for the funding and overcoming various bureaucratic obstacles for new schemes. And that, of course, has to happen on issues such as we've just been talking about, like residential cycle parking, which I've been banging on about for 30 years. So I would say not a big backlash visible, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to be very wary and prepared to fight a battle of ideas to push for things which will appear to be very restrictive to a lot of to a lot of motorists. You can look at the Twitter threads of people like Chris Kenyon, who tweets under Box Spike for his thread on what happened in London, which is more upbeat than I've been just here. Okay, reading list. Very quickly going over new things. There is a consultation on clean air. Go to the Mums for Lungs website, which will tell you how to fill it in, because it's a bit more complicated. It's about general environmental issues. Only one part of it is about particulates. And Transport Action Network, are doing another fundraiser for reasons which you'll see when you go to their website. And also, I mentioned last week the Transport Committee call for evidence, and it appears that Grant Shapps seems to be going ahead with these scooters a bit more forcefully than perhaps his civil servants were suggesting or had been suggesting. And also, nothing new there, just look at all those things to read. I don't know if we know any more about Active Travel Fund bid allocations, but hopefully now that new councils are in place, we'll find out. That's from London, again from We Are Possible. To this before, just 10% of London residents are responsible for half of its car trips. And that's just a little slide from Hackney, Stoke Newington, Church Street, which has had various measures to reduce motor traffic going through it. And that's it. Any questions?
Thanks, Bob. While anyone thinks if they've got any questions, I know Mark potentially does have some Active Travel Fund 3 news, but
yes,
I will leave him to explain.
Well, very, very quickly, I heard from an extremely reliable source, not Brian, who is very senior in one of the organisations that's got something to do with Active Travel England, that it should be announced in the next 2 weeks. I can't say anything more who it was or who I spoke to, but they're in an extremely knowledgeable position to know what they're talking about. The councils know, actually, that's the thing to remind you, is the councils know what they've got. So
we should have asked Adam Tranter while he was on. I think you've just coined a new acronym, extremely reliable source. It's not Brian, ERSNB. So, okay, well, thanks, Bob, and thanks for tolerating the change to the running order. And we will finish up with a couple of things. So Steve has live, while we've been speaking, we've not just organised a live Ideas with Beers in Sheffield on the first week of July to tie in with Cycle City, it sounds like. We've also, Steve's worked up a vote so that we can put Bob's statement that blue handlebar tape with pink cycle frame is against the rules. We can put that to the vote of the group.
It's cerise. Cerise is the problem. Yes.
So there it is. There's your. Everyone's voting. Go for it. Oh, I don't seem to have an option to vote. What's wrong?
Is this the most popular vote we've ever had?
Yeah.
Just tap on yes or no.
Your co-host, Claire. Hosts don't get to vote, Claire. Sorry.
Huh.
Bob,
there is actually, I don't know if we've got time for another poll, but I was thinking that would we like a session on just or a big long session on residential secure and convenient cycle parking, because we had one on highways cycle parking with Mark, which was good, you know, sort of all you needed to know in about 20 minutes. Residential is actually a bit more complicated. Would people like a session on that, or, you know, do we want to poll that, or what?
Well, let's finish one poll before we ask a question about another one. So on this poll, Bob, I think I'll hand over to Steve to announce the result, but it's looking like a fairly cut and dried result here.
I think 87% are kind of not with you on the bus.
I think this means the end of society, and we're all going to be running around naked in the streets.
Cool. And yeah, maybe people can post in the chat if they liked Bob's idea about a proposal for a future session on residential bike parking. Certainly Oliver Lord's campaign is running, and there's lots more to talk about on that. So please post in the chat if you like that idea. And people are starting to have to leave. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Ruth to give us the final word before we finish up for this week. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Another great session as usual. I thought Oliver Lord was talking about residential parking, but maybe I missed it. Yes, so today I went to the leader of our council has just had to stand down through ill health, which is very sad because he was fantastic on cycling. And as you know, Chiswick got C9 and it got lots of stuff pushed through partly because of him and his cabinet. But I was talking to the head of transport, as in officer as opposed to councillor, about the fact that one of the not infrastructure bits of C9 on a Sunday when cars are all parked along there because it's singular line, people who cycle have to cycle on the opposite side of the road to avoid the door zone. And could he think about putting double yellow lines and moving the car parking altogether? And this is my last word, so don't jump in, anyone. His word was, it's a question of balance. And that's it. Thank you, everybody, for coming.